So I'd just like to welcome everybody to our first Consumer Partnership Interest Area webinar today. Just before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. Just to say, at ARCS acknowledges the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and work. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Your lines are automatically muted, so if you would like to ask a question, you can unmute your line by just clicking on the little phone or mic icon, or alternatively, there's an opportunity to type any questions into the chat function, and we will monitor that chat function throughout the webinar. This session is being recorded, so please don't record it individually, and just to say that thank you for everybody for registering and attending this webinar today. So we're going to do a welcome, then there'll just be an update on the annual conference, discussions about any topics that we'd like to discuss in the next meeting. So I'd like to hand over to Shani Dyer, the ARC CEO, to provide that welcome and update. Thanks,
Great,
Shani.
thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sue, and welcome everybody. This is really exciting for us. This is our first patient-centric webinar or interest area. First of all, I'd like to thank Janelle Bowden, who's been central to this and initiated this program. We've done quite a bit with Janelle over the time, so thank you, Janelle. And also thank you to Kathy and Lee, who will be speaking today. So for people who don't know ARCS, we've been around for about 36 years, and we're a member-based not-for-profit organisation. And our primary focus is to educate people who are developing therapeutics in Australia and overseas. We do this through our education programs. We have career pathways that people can understand professional development. And importantly, we do advocacy in the sector. It's important that the voice of our members, who are people who work in the sector, are heard. An important voice that is really coming through in our sector is the patient voice. And we're very passionate about listening to patients, consumers in our sector, because you are the focus of what we do. So we are here for you, and as part of our commitment, this interest area group has been established. So let's move on to the next slide. This is just a horrible photo of myself. Great photos of Joe and Sue. You can see Sue Mason. Oh look, we're all family here, so I can say things like that. So I was the person on the left, Joe in the middle, and Sue was, you can see Sue already. There you go. Anyway, that's just to make it personal, so that we're not just talking heads, we're real people. So as I said before, ARCS as an organisation, it's about the people who work in this sector. I mentioned this before. We do the professional development, education and career pathways and advocacy. And our people cover a whole range of areas, and some of you will never heard of some of the words that are on this organogram. But we do all things that are required to get new products to market, and all these words are part of the activities that our people undertake to get things underway. I think that's now I'm going to talk about our commitment. I've already said this again. Obviously I didn't read my slides very well, so here's my first mistake. But just to understand the things that we've done in the past, our last large face-to-face conference was about patients being at the centre of healthcare. We didn't run a full-on conference because of COVID last year, but this year we have, we're very excited about having a face-to-face conference from the 7th to the 9th of June. The theme of this annual conference is From Pandemic to Recovery, Building Australia's Competitive Advantage Post-COVID. Obviously, clinical trials, regulatory were very important through the COVID period, and a lot of the issues that came out of that we'll be addressing at the conference. But importantly, like we did in 2019, we will be running scholarships for consumers to attend this conference. It was fantastic in 2019. The consumers who came along, although only a percentage of the audience were incredibly vocal and really, I think, added to the conversation and really brought our speakers back to, well, if there's a delay in a trial for 3 months, that actually matters. And it was just fantastic to hear that from people from whom it does really matter. So we'll be offering these scholarships. The information is going to be on our website. You'll be able to register through an expression of interest. And obviously we want people there who are passionate about representing patients and will get and people who will get a lot out of the conference. So I think that's all I'm supposed to be saying right now. I will now hand over to Janelle, who will be leading the sessions now. Thank you so much, Janelle.
Thanks, Jenny, and hi everyone. I'm delighted to be working with ARCS on this interest area group, consumer partnership. Engagement in the work that we do, I think, is incredibly important, and anyone who knows me knows that I can get a little bit on my high horse about it, but I think it's a great opportunity that ARCS is providing here to bring consumers into the work of the industry and to have some great conversations between each other. Sometimes they need to be frank, sometimes they're educational, sometimes they're but hopefully they'll always be honest and open and transparent. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what this interest area does over time. I'd like to thank ARCS for recognising what is essentially the growth in the consumer workforce. So we talk about professional development of everyone working in our industry. Increasingly, I believe there's a large voluntary consumer workforce that is also seeking out professional development so that we can, I guess, speak the same language to a certain extent and work on initiatives that together matter to everybody. So thank you for ARCS for that. And I look forward to seeing what consumer partnership in the ARCS organisation looks like in the future. And what a fantastic opportunity again with the ARCS conference scholarships. So today I thought the name Consumer Partnerships has really come about by thinking about what it is that ARCS might be trying to achieve by having an interest area group like that. We're seeing big changes in the engagement and awareness and activation of patients in the health sector and in the therapeutics development industry, everywhere from coming up with ideas for products to development of products to approval and reimbursement of products. And it's important that we work towards partnership in that so that everybody's best interests are served as well as they can be. I'd also like, before I kick off, and introduce Lee and Kathy, who I'm delighted is joining us today, to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which each of us are all meeting today via the webinar, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and excuse the frog in the throat. What we're hoping to talk about today is kind of, I'm not sure to what extent everybody understands what the patient engagement people in a pharmaceutical company do, that they exist, first of all, what their role is, and what patient engagement in the pharmaceutical industry looks like. And I'm led to believe we have quite a broad audience, both from the sector itself and from the consumer workforce. And so I think it's a great opportunity to get a level understanding of what the industry itself is trying to do through examples such as AstraZeneca and Pfizer. So I'm really delighted today to have Lee and Kathy on the call with us today. So Lee is Manager of External Relations at Pfizer, and she connects patient groups and leading corporate social responsibility. She's the chair of Impact 2030, Mobilising Human Capital.
Okay, I think we've lost
corporate
you.
affairs for non-profits.
Oh, we just lost you for a moment there, Janelle.
Sorry. So Lee has held a range of volunteer and professional roles in marketing, communications and corporate affairs for non-profits and therapeutics companies. As a nurse, Lee is passionate about patients, their lived experience, and bringing this wisdom into business conversations and advocating for their needs at Pfizer. Kathy is Head of Patient Advocacy and International Patient Advocacy and Affordability Director at AstraZeneca. Kathy's a marketing and public relations professional with over 20 years of experience in the pharmaceutical sector, 11 years focused in oncology. She's passionate about patient advocacy and the ability for patients to access the latest clinical medicines, making a difference to their lives. So thank you both for coming today. Have I missed anything you'd like to add to those introductions?
No, that sounds very grand, but in fact, it's really why we're here is being passionate about the patients and like you said, having an open and honest conversation where everyone can be on the same page, which is really exciting.
Thanks, Kathy. So the way that we thought we would do this today is to have it via a Q&A kind of discussion with Lee and Kathy. I've given them a few questions that we can think about, but we're basically going to have a discussion, and I do invite your questions along the way, and hopefully we'll be able to get to those through the course of this meeting. So I may as well kick off. So maybe starting with you, Lee, can you describe what your role in patient engagement is for your company?
Yeah. In 2 words, the advocate's advocate. That's what my job is. My job is to listen and understand and act as a conduit, if you will, between what our business is doing and what's happening with and for patients. And we have a number of pillars of what we call patient centricity, and I can talk about that a little bit more later, but part of that is also about building a culture and a mindset and methods within our organisation, a little bit like how we organise ourselves, our housekeeping internally, so that we're all consistently, working and operating in the same kind of way that is code compliant, but is also consistent with our organisation's values as well. So the advocate's advocate, that's what I do.
I like that. And Lee, your microphone might need to be just a little bit closer if you can.
There we are.
Perfect.
Right, got it.
Perfect. Thank you. And Kathy, how about yourself? What does your role look like?
So for me, when I first started at AstraZeneca, it was specifically a role around patient advocacy in the oncology space. And I think it's a testament to companies recognising the need to have this as a specific role, to be that champion and advocate within the company, because throughout my career, I have always wanted to and connected with the patient organisations and community to understand what that means to us and the company to really sit and listen. But I think there's been an evolution as the patient voices become louder, that companies are realising that we really need to put a focus on that. So my role was specifically oncology, and now that's broadened across all of our portfolios. So we're making sure that we're understanding and listening to the patient voice, not just in oncology, but in respiratory, cardiovascular, renal, metabolism, and broader. And I think the beauty of that is that through these connections with stakeholders, this broadens to carers, to other areas that we might never have even considered. And for Lee and myself, that means bringing those ideas to whether it's our Medicines Australia working group or individually with each other, so we can support not just our therapeutic areas, but a community and getting that voice heard. So it's a bit of a large, long explanation to my role. But similar to Lee as well, it's not just sort of a role that sits there. It's very much interacting throughout all our companies, cross-functional teams, to make sure that we can champion that patient voice. And we're also making sure that anyone in the company that's got a passionate interest in understanding the patient voice or the community can reach to me or our team and learn how they can get involved, and making sure it's not just sort of to one role. As Lee said, we sort of have ambassadors within AstraZeneca that can reach out as well.
So Kathy, is it everybody interacting within your company, or is it set kind of roles? How are your companies interacting with patients, and why?
From a structural perspective, there's myself heading up advocacy, and I've got 2 people that reported to me specifically around the oncology area and the biopharmaceutical area, which is all those other areas I talked about. So we are the primary contact, because otherwise it could end up being, it's very confusing for patient organisations to have 1,000 contacts. So I'm sort of that point of contact, or the 2 members of my team are the central point of contact. However, when we engage with the patient organisations and they either come in and involved with us, it's meeting the cross-functional team, because you're not wanting it to be my voice is speaking on behalf of them, but it just is trying to keep it a little bit streamlined. And also, so we're not bombarding patient organisations with everyone from the company coming. So I guess that's why they've sort of set up these roles, to have a sort of a bit of process involved. So there are probably 3 key roles, but our patient advocacy ambassadors might sort of have connectivity depending on the projects, if that makes sense.
So do you assign kind of patients to projects, and then that project team may then work with that person for the life of a project?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's pretty. It's so vast and varied between the various projects that and we're probably getting on to your your next questions about why and how do we engage with patient organisations and consumers. And I think for me, the why is really simple, because I think in the past a lot of assumptions have been made with patients and communities and organisations about what we think they need and what they want to hear from industry and pharmaceuticals. And it was almost seen as a bit of a, you know, are we able to interact, because we're obviously bound by the Medicines Australia and legal terms. But I think it's becoming much more interactive and organic, realising that we really, unless we actually hear and understand from patients and patient organisations, how can we make an informed decision about what we think they need? So in terms of interactions, that's simply the why, for us to sit and, as Lee mentioned earlier, to pause, understand what is the patient community all about, where is the need, how can we help bring that to our companies, and where is their mutual alignment to really be the champion for that.
So Lee, would it be the same with your company, or does it work similarly?
Yes, so 2 layers there. So I'll start with the why, because I think that comes first. There is just so much mutual interest and benefit, and the benefit of bringing patients and pharmaceutical companies together far outweighs not doing it. You know, if we don't interact in appropriate ways, obviously given legal requirements, etc., the cost can be massive. You know, we can head off in a totally wrong direction and totally miss the value that patients and carers place on particular aspects of a medicine we might be developing, or a support asset that we might be developing as well. And you know, it's a little bit like a hand and a glove. I mean, a hand is a hand, a glove is a glove. You put the 2 together and you have a warm hand. You know, so it's one is not as good without the other in cold weather. Sorry, bad analogy, but you know what I mean. They go together, and you know, Pfizer's purpose is breakthroughs that change patients' lives. How are we going to know if we're changing patients' lives or not if we're not having conversations with patients? And you know, I think that's that's the real direction for our company. In terms of how we do that, we have 3 pillars of patient centricity, which is how we talk about it internally, and how we organise ourselves and how we align around a culture of care at Pfizer, and that is insights and immersion. So how we listen, come alongside and understand patients, and how we seek to put ourselves in patients' and carers' shoes. And we've got supports and services. So are we orientating our resources towards supports and services that really change things, or are we orientating around supports and services that tick a box? I would hope it's the supports and services that change things, but it's amazing how organisations have done in the past. It's like, oh, we need to have a website, we need to have a brochure, we need to have but you know, does it really hit the mark, and is it really changing things for people? So one of the great outcomes of being patient-centric is sometimes it means we actually stop doing things. We stop doing things that aren't working and don't make a difference in order to be able to reorientate resources to things that do actually make a difference. And then we have empowering and equipping. And that is about coming alongside, you know, patients and patient organisations to help them have a voice. So whether that's, you know, connecting patients with different networks, whether that's working through Medicines Australia, or whether that's continuing to support or invest in things that patient organisations are already doing really, really well for their voice to be heard. And I am the primary contact and same, I guess, navigator, as Kathy was saying, into our organisation. But we're really trying to equip all our colleagues right across the organisation to be patient ambassadors and have mutually beneficial interactions with patients and carers, because there's very clear guidance in our Medicines Australia Code of Conduct and Working Together guide that tells us what we can and can't do and is principles based. And, you know, provided we adhere to all of that, the rest is really about relationship and trust and getting to know each other, and we can all be doing that.
Yeah, trust, I think, is one of those big questions, and it takes a long time to build trust. And I think that's certainly been a learning for me as I've entered the patient engagement space, is just how long it takes to build trust with people. And it shouldn't really be a surprise. We don't just instantly talk to the person on the street about our deepest, darkest secrets. So it's no great surprise that it takes a while to build a relationship between organisations and the community. So you are big global organisations, and I imagine that globally a lot of the patient engagement work, particularly earlier on in the research and development lifecycle, might happen overseas. What kinds of projects and things can you do here locally to either inform those global activities or to contextualise those global activities to Australia?
Great question, Janelle. Pfizer, particularly in the last 6 to 12 months, has been moving more towards what we call a global model, where it's I know, another great catchphrase. And that is where there's an absolute recognition that we are a global company, and that there really is a lot lost if things are retained or developed only in one location around the world, and with very little resonance throughout the rest of the world. So what that looks like these days is teams, whether it's in clinical trials, whether it's in the new product planning, the marketing side of things, all working cross-functionally, being led out of the US, but with involvement with all the different countries around the world. And how that intersects with the patient landscape is, and this is the most favourite part of my job, is getting to meet patients actually from all around the world. So we might be on a call with an advocate like me from Canada, from Germany, from Israel, UK, along with advocates from in different, disease areas, all sitting around the virtual table talking about a particular topic, and pressure testing ideas, really seeking to understand more, go deeper into how our medicines impact patients, and finding out what that looks like in different contexts throughout the world. And that's how we're working more these days, Janelle.
Yeah, great. And Kathy, how does your company kind of...
Yeah, very similar to the evolution of what's happening at Pfizer. It used to be, Global would design something, they'd roll it out to all the other markets, and Australia, not being seen as a huge market, was like, hold on, but that might not fit what's happening locally for us culturally, or did you actually ask any of our patient organisations? So that's really flipped on its head, particularly in the last 5 years, and maybe it's because there are roles like ours, because when an idea is being rolled out and evolved, we're right in the front and centre of that, and Australia's become quite a loud voice. Maybe that's just me, but I will reach out, or the global team reach out to us. We always put up our hand. We make sure either myself and involve our patient groups on those global steering committee meetings, because then it gets that real, as Lee was saying, connectivity about what is happening around the world, and we can learn something that potentially we could utilise back here, and we're also able to have our voice used. And I think one of a really good example was with the clinical trials team a few years back, where they involved a patient and patient organisations and discussing about the rollout of a clinical trial. And this patient said, well, could we roll it so we could have the treatment rather than go to the hospital twice in the month? If we had that treatment on this day, it would make a huge difference to me from, not having to go parking twice, if that didn't affect the clinical trial. And the clinical trial was actually able to be adapted to suit the patient, which wasn't that it wasn't a big issue. It just hadn't been thought through by the trial design. So things like that for me is about getting the patient voice in, community voice in, healthcare professional, healthcare organisation voice in early, to sit, listen and learn and to contribute. And so you can really have an impact and sort of change design of things, whether it is something around an unmet need in education that's needed, or even a clinical trial.
Yeah, I think it's great. And are you getting people involved across the therapeutic life cycle, like right from idea to the clinical development to the approval and reimbursement?
One of my pet hates is and you see this sometimes, like, oh my gosh, we need to quickly see what does the patient think about this. And I said, well, we have been working with the patient organisation for a number of years. You don't just bring it in at the last minute. It's bringing that patient voice in right at the beginning. So for us, the minute there's a talk of a new area, or whether it be something to do with carers or something that we learn by default, it's like, right, my role is to try and go and understand, learn, and try and bring that into the company and make sure that perspective is heard right early on. And to your earlier point, that's how you build trusted relationships. It's a long-term relationship to really truly understand what that healthcare organisation or patient wants and needs. Where is there an opportunity to work together from a company perspective within all the guidelines and boundaries that we exist, and really make a difference? And I think you can see some of those partnerships that are really evolving over time and are truly making a difference, where it is a benefit for the patient organisation. It's making sure the company is steering that conversation in the right way.
And Lee, any thoughts on? Sorry, I've just gone completely blank. Any thoughts on that? Sorry.
No, look, I mean, Kathy's right on point there. So we think of this as long term as well, and I think in medicine development, from the very early stages right through to first time inpatients, right through to it having been an established product in the market for many years. Because of the way we work as an organisation, things are reasonably compartmentalised. We have business units, we have certain functions, we have finance, we have clinical, we have market access. We have different professionals who are all experts in their own area, very deep expertise. So what Kathy and I do is a little bit like cat herding. We're continually getting the right people together in the room with patients and their expertise, and bringing that together so that there's a mutual understanding as soon and as early as possible in the process as we can. And Kathy's been in her role at AstraZeneca for some years, and myself as well, and prior to Pfizer doing the same thing in other organisations. And what I'm seeing is a real and about time too, by the way, a real taking much more seriously what that actually involves. And I'll give you a really good example. So we've now developed a process where you know, if we're going to be having interactions with patients or patient groups, to bring the patient voice to something, whether it might be to, you know, co-create some materials or hear from a patient or a family to better understand from an insights and immersion perspective, we're really trying to encourage colleagues to think about this early in their planning process. So rather than, you know, 2 weeks before an event thinking, oh, it'd be great to have a patient come to the event, say, actually, you know what, you're probably thinking a whole lot earlier when you're planning. Really, that needs to be integrated much sooner, and it's not because there's lots of forms to fill in, it's because patients are actually really busy people too. They've got diaries and they've got activities and they've got holidays to take and all those other things, and we can't just simply click our fingers and expect a patient to turn up, and that's not in the spirit of mutual benefit either. And I'm not saying that a lot of that happens, but you do. This is about building that trust and changing things from being transactional and needing a piece of information in order to move forward with another milestone on a project to actually, we're all in this together. We're on a journey and we're taking these steps together. And that's where it's about, for us, it's about maintaining a culture that becomes reflex, that we are always thinking, oh, you know, what if there was a patient in the chair while we're having this conversation? How would it impact them? You know, as we sit here and think about that investment, what would a patient think about that? And so through our ambassadors network, we continue to, I guess, identify, amplify and share best practice that's already happening around the organisation. There's so much of it that is going on. So I don't want you to think that it's all just about magicking up patients, but it really is a mindset shift over the years that I've seen, and it's very exciting.
I think there's some great points in there. And something just struck me, and this wasn't on our question list. You talk about all these additional, the need to magic up patients, if you like, because of all the work that you're doing and how much involvement you want people to have. Do you see that causing a lot of strain on the consumer groups that you work with? Because often there's only a few individuals that, you know, have the time and the passion or the expertise to fit into those groups. And when I talk about developing the consumer workforce, I think this is a real potential problem around burnout and getting diverse voices into these conversations.
I think you've made a really important point, Janelle, and I think COVID really hit that hard last year, because working, Lee and I are very privileged to work or be part of the Medicines Australia Consumer Advisory Working Group, where we've got a core group of about 7 or 8 companies, and we meet once a month. During COVID, we were meeting once a week because we were hearing this huge pressure on the patient healthcare organisations during that time, because their fundraising was decimated. It was usually all face-to-face. They were facing, how do they manage their finances? We were feeling, what could we do to support? So take COVID out, these healthcare organisations work tirelessly. A number of them are volunteers based, and I think it's getting that balance right, because we don't want to not engage and offer every opportunity, because and from an excited company that really wants to be patient-centric and patient-focused, but it's balancing that with saying, hold on, we can't keep reaching out and exhausting healthcare organisations because there are limited resources. So I think that's where Lee and my role and anyone in our type of role works with the company to sort of prioritise, well, what are the really key things, and works with the patient groups and say, well, look, there's a few ideas or a few things that are coming out of the company. What makes sense to you most? And working out the best alignment. So it's not taking up so much time for everyone, and it's getting the best outcome for the community and the patient organisation, and it's still meeting the company needs, what they're needing to find out, but it's very much what are those areas of alignment that make the most sense, rather than, because careful what you wish for. It'd be so amazing to reach out every single time, but I'm very conscious of people's time and commitment, as Lee was talking about earlier. People are, healthcare organisations are busy, often under-resourced, so it's just getting that balance right.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
I think I'm sorry.
Oh, no, sorry. Oh, no, I was just going to say, so we have, a few checking points, I suppose, internally when we're looking at these kinds of engagements as well. And that is, how can we maximise the value of the interaction for the patient and also for the health consumer organisation? And so we're often asking ourselves a whole bunch of questions before we even have that interaction. So, for example, if we're wanting some insights and immersion to come alongside and understand, could we produce, rather than just have a patient come attend a meeting of 20 folks and share their story, could we create an enduring asset together, like a video or a transcript or something that could then be used by the patient or the patient group through their networks to amplify their messages and help them to achieve some of what they're trying to do as well. So it's always thinking about the mutual benefit. Clearly there's going to be a benefit to the pharmaceutical company to hear from a patient and gain greater understanding. But what's the benefit to the patient, that individual patient, and what's the benefit to the organisation they might be working with or a patient group? And we have to dig really deeply for that sometimes. And if we can't find that mutual benefit, we need to ask ourselves, should we be doing it?
And that also comes down to the trust as well. And it's, for that healthcare organisation or patient organisation to say, you know what, that's too much. And it's really important to have that trusted and respected relationship, which makes sure that it's, getting the right outcomes for the patient organisations.
So I'm going to bring in one of the kind of questions that's been raised here in the chat. Because it kind of also feeds into the next question I had for you anyway. Jacqueline has said, often patients' organisations do not represent the voice of individual consumers. How do you ensure that you have a varied voice, so the culturally and linguistically diverse, those that are hardly reached, those that are underserved, for example, and to make sure that the consumers don't feel like they're just part of being a pawn in a game?
That's a very, very good question, and it's also one that's quite tricky, and it's up to us to try and make sure we do get a representation of that organisation, but also the individual voices within. And something that or an organisation that we have worked with in the past, and I'd urge Jacqueline to have a look at the website, is with the Centre for Community-Driven Research, which really talks about understanding the patient personal experience, expectation and knowledge, and it's a broad, and it reaches out directly to patients and or carers. And it gets a very individualised perspective of that particular area. So it involves an hour interview and some online. It's a really strong quantitative and qualitative research, which it actually provides some really true insights alongside the organisation as well. So that's just one example of ways that we can really try and understand individuals and also variabilities, whether that be regional versus rural, because that can have a big impact on patients being able to get to treatment and also the education that they might need. So I think it's a really important point, and it's something that Lee and we always need to check ourselves and say, well, look, are we actually understanding the true representation of the patient community as well, not just the organisation?
Great. So to get into some of the practical nitty-gritty kind of questions, if a consumer wanted to engage with a pharma company or a pharma company wants to engage with a consumer, what's the best way for a consumer to approach the company, and then what will the company perhaps do in terms of contracts or confidentiality or payments, the financial stuff? How does that all work from a practical perspective? Lee, do you want to?
Thank you, Janelle. Yeah, no, that's a great question. So we do have a set of global guidelines and also a set of local implementation guidelines around engagement with patients, and the reason for that is so that there is consistency around the world in how we're doing this, and it is based on a set of principles around mutual interest and, of course, in line with local law and codes and so on. And also in line with the increased value that that we recognise that information and that context and that relationship brings to a pharmaceutical company's ability to do its job well. So just as when we interact with healthcare professionals in an advisory capacity to understand a bit more about their prescribing patterns or where a medicine may fit into clinical care, we have moved from, I guess, ad hoc arrangements with patients and patient groups to much more formalised arrangements in recognition of that value, the value of their time and commitment in providing that expertise and information, and also, as you mentioned, Janelle, that growing capability in the, I guess, the consumer workforce, if you will. So we do have honorarium that we offer to patients when we're engaging with them, and as part of that there is a process of documentation, and really that's for clarity and transparency, to make sure it's really clear what the expectation is for the patients, and where their information that they're providing is going to be used, and all those privacy considerations and all the laws and so on that are required there, but also just because it's the right thing to do. And we have, as I mentioned before, we make sure that we have really adequate lead times on projects, so that patients finding the right patient can be tricky at times too, depending on what it is that the types of insights that we're looking for, and then making sure that that person is well briefed and well supported going into whether it's a piece of research, an ad board, or some kind of video recording of their story. So that's there's some of the things that we use to support that kind of engagement.
And at AstraZeneca, very similar. It used to be sort of a bit ad hoc, and I think because globally we are wanting to have more and more of these engagements, and one of the things that I'm championing is to try and make it as simple as possible within the law, because some of these agreements, when going back a few years, were really hard to decipher, and I'm not a lawyer, and it was sort of very can be overwhelming. So one of the things that I'm hoping to do is work with our patient affairs globally to say what is the minimum legal requirements locally that we need, that is, protecting the company and the healthcare organisation and or patient. And as Lee said, it's all about transparency, what the project is about, and the timeframes and expectations, and making sure it's clear. And that also develops that trust and relationship where I think you're having those conversations, but it's also documented. And we've had some instances where patients have said, oh, I don't want to sign that, and that's absolutely fine, and we just at that point can't engage because it doesn't protect them or it doesn't protect us. So there's that certain rules and regulations that we have to abide by, and others are absolutely fine. So I think it's working, and if anyone is uncomfortable, it's highlighting what that area is, and I take it to the legal team and say, do we have to have this bit in there or not? And there are certain negotiables and certain that just have to be standard, but that's something I'm really passionate about, trying to keep it as simple, plain language as possible. And to your, I think, first question, how can people reach out? Find us. I mean, Lee and I, the people from AstraZeneca and Pfizer, but just reach out either through Medicines Australia, through to the Consumer Advisory Working Group, and they can put you in touch with us, because we're very happy to be, and through our websites. It might be a bit of a longer way through the communications team or MedInfo, but for anyone who's keen and willing to, support, understand, or need further information, that's what we're, as Lee and I sometimes say, we're sort of the directors or the navigators, and make sure that whatever information where we can possibly find it and help and support, we will get to that right person and at least get some frame of answer.
And I think you both said you're on LinkedIn, so there's a quick tip for anyone who might be looking to contact both of you. It's probably worth, while we mention that while we're talking about that practical stuff, that the Medicines Australia does have a working together guide for how the organisations can work with groups, which I know is a work in progress for this year as well, to look at how that might be changing. And there's just been a question from Chris around whether the code of conduct is freely available, and it's on the website. So perhaps after this, as part of the communications on this meeting, we can send out a link to that for anyone who's interested. What do you think are the important skills, support, infrastructure, vision, etc., necessary within your companies to support effective consumer partnerships? Kathy?
I'm happy. Director Evan, I'm happy to start with that. I think it's for me, it's making sure the company that you've got an enterprise thinking approach, that a willingness to think beyond the medicine, because it's not just about a medicine, it's about an unmet need, a community, it's education, and it's really being able to be a good empathetic listener. And I think making sure there's enough that we're not having in siloed approach. I think, as Lee mentioned earlier, we've got business units as well, and my role is to sort of debunk sort of the business unit approach where appropriate, and say, well, look, let's all get together on this particular project, because this, you know, patient voice or representation affects all of your business units, or connecting the right people. So I think you need to have quite an enterprise thinking approach. And I think you touched on the working together guide, and I think that was, you know, it was done, I think in 2015 was the last iteration, and already in 6 years that's now sort of out of date. It needs to be evolve and sort of working and understanding how we can actually all work together properly. So we've got the perspective of industry, the Department of Health, and the patient organisations all having an equal voice and seat at the table together. So we're understanding those perspectives, not sort of in siloed conversations.
Yeah, and to add to that, Kathy. Yeah, no, to add to that, Kathy, thank you. I think it all comes down to culture. I think it comes down to the hearts and minds of the people who are within the organisations within which we're working. We all have different areas of expertise, whether it's a finance person, whether it's a healthcare professional in a clinical liaison role, or whether it's in the types of roles that Kathy and I are doing. You know, a commitment to the purpose and the values of your organisation. And creating a culture of care. I have never met so many caring and clever people than I have in the pharmaceutical industry. You know, it is just, you know, I get quite emotional about it, actually. It really is a place of people who care about, you know, not only their colleagues around them, just humanity in general. You know, I've worked in a number of different organisations, even within non-profit organisations, and hands down, the people that I have met and the culture that has attracted those people and retained those people within Pfizer specifically, I can speak to, but also, you know, having many interactions with lots of other people in the pharmaceutical industry, including Kathy, caring and capable, and that comes down to culture and leadership as well.
And just probably adding on to that too, and I couldn't agree with you more, Lee, and I think one of the projects that I've been really proud to work with and on at AstraZeneca is called a Patient Journey Week, where, because sometimes it's just the smaller cross-functional teams that you might have an advisory board and get a patient or patient organisation to come and speak and share their story. But we've broadened that across the company. So whether you're in human resources, IT, events organisation, or part of the digital team, you can hear from a patient or a patient organisation about a particular area. So we really try and get that patient voice throughout the company, and it is extraordinary what comes out, the conversations that happen after that, because basically we are all patients or carers ourselves, and the number of people that will reach out and say, oh, and you know, I've had this happen to me, and it starts that real personal conversation, and it starts to become part of their psyche, rather than, even if they're in the finance team, they can really see the benefit that they are making to those patients or the community through just, you know, let's get that, you know, computer fixed so someone can actually work on their project to go and get something done. Like, it's all that chain of events rather than just sort of that coming to and from work. So it's a real, to Lee's point, cultural mindset that you try and change and shift.
So you are members of your company's like individual roles being trained to help with that kind of mind shift change that's kind of necessary, that cultural change, to think about including the patient voice or patient perspective in what they're doing. Erin has made a point that many of the consumer peak organisations provide this kind of support, training to support the mindset shift. How are you achieving that in your organisations?
I think for me, it's through those iterations like the patient journey week, where we literally liaise, and that whole week is all around about involving the patient voice and understanding those areas. So it's usually 7 or 8 patient organisations that we will wish to have and engage, and it's, you know, brought about by the company or people's passion. So can we have this organisation? Can we hear from this patient? I came across this, and sort of really becoming, so that's like only 1 week a year, but then throughout the year, and it's one of the many ways that we engage with patient organisations is having awareness days, or sort of helping support the fundraising. Lee and I climbed Mount Cosie in this blustering wind, not for fun, but for raising awareness for rare cancer patients. So that's,
come on,
you know,
it was fun.
It was fun at the end, but that's sort of one example where throughout the company, that's where our PAGs, our patient organisation ambassadors, get really involved and passionate, because there might be someone whose brother or friend or carer is affected by that particular area, and they'll reach out to us and say, can we host a fundraising event? We say, absolutely you can. And so then they share that throughout the company, and those sort of engagements have become much more increased, to the point that it's, you know, you don't want to sort of every day we're asking for some more fundraising money, but having someone champion a cause with the passion and getting that, allowing that voice to be heard is really important. So I think it's a continuing evolving process, and one that we're open to ideas. So if Erin or anyone has any ideas of how we can change or involve in that, would be really great.
Yeah, if you've got some training modules, reach out, please, Erin. Certainly our Patient Ambassadors Network, we are internally focused and externally focused, so we're continuing to share best practice that we identify within our organisation, but also best practice that we identify outside of our organisation. So it might be something we've spotted that, you know, Kathy's organisation's doing well, or is happening globally. There's an organisation called I for Pharma. I'm not sure if you've ever heard about them, but they put out some reports around patient centricity and trends in that regard. So we stay close to the literature, as I'm sure you would expect. You know, we're looking for trends as well, and local learnings. So if you've got some information you think we'd like to know about, yeah, link with me on LinkedIn. We'll have a chat.
The flip side to Erin's question is also, to what extent are you supporting consumers to upskill and to understand what engagement is, and how best to work with your companies, and yeah, support them in their journey, their advocacy journey?
That is such a great question. Such a great question, isn't it?
There's a couple of organisations, and again, if these patients, consumers wish to reach out and how we can support them, we'd love to learn. But in some of the areas, we've just recently connected with the Australian Patient Association, so I don't know, and that's very much around individual patients and experiences that are quite diverse. And there's another organisation that Lee and I work with called the Patient Voice Initiative. So we wouldn't, for instance, engage one-on-ones and do a direct advocacy, because that's not in the realms. But if a patient or a patient organisation reached out and said, how can I become an advocate, or how can you support me, we can certainly connect them with the right people and help make sure there's the support that way, and that we understand what kind of support's needed, because we haven't got all the knowledge on all things. We just try and, as Lee said, keep connected through these organisations that aren't just the healthcare organisations, but also the broader representation of consumers and patients alike. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Lee.
No, also, I guess in the distant past, a number of pharmaceutical companies did get together and supported I guess some education, some empowering and equipping education with patient groups about, you know, how does the working together guide work, what does good look like in relation to partnerships, and that extended. We had I guess an advisory panel that helped to guide the curricula of some of that education, and it really sort of expanded beyond, you know, how to work with a pharmaceutical company into, you know what, we'd like some more guidance on how to become a better HCO. We'd like to understand better how to do fundraising. We'd like to understand better how to do, and so we stopped doing that in more recent times because there was a lot of duplication, because there's now lots of organisations, whether it's community.org or Patient Voice Initiative, what have you, that have specialised in different areas of empowering and equipping. And so now what we do more of is really navigating different patient organisations to some of those resources, rather than you know, I guess putting on a conference, if you will, for patients. And I think also that creates a bit more independence and allows for deeper expertise in particular areas. So, for example, Patient Voice Initiative have particular expertise about helping patient organisations contribute patient evidence, for example, into the health technology assessment process. And, you know, my community, I think it's called, has, you know, is expert on governance about running, you know, charity boards, for example. Bonojo, you know, they do similar kinds of education about how to create winning grants and so on. So everyone sort of specialises, and again, you know, what Kathy and I do is act as a bit of a navigator. Have you thought about, you know, if this is an area you're struggling in, or you know, could do with some equipping, go this way. But yeah, we're always interested in sharing, and that's a lot of what we do actually around the CORG Medicines Australia table, is sharing all the different kind of interactions we've had with different groups and areas of expertise, so that we can all be navigating, you know, the patient groups and patients that we work with to those different areas of expertise.
But again, we're really open. If you've got other ideas of how or what you would like or need, that's what we're also here to brainstorm and bring and help out where we can.
So I'm very conscious of time, and while we have lots of questions that we haven't got to, and I do apologise to everyone for those questions. Maybe what I'll do is I'll do a follow-up with Lee and Kathy on some of those questions. Sue, I don't know, I'm presuming you can capture those questions and perhaps send them through. That would be great. And we'll maybe do a short Q&A on a couple of ones and send out a few links to some documents in follow-up to this session. I'd like to so thank Lee and Kathy for sharing transparently what's going on within their organisations, and I'm so excited about what the future may hold. We didn't get to that question about what the future may hold, but this is the first interest area meeting, and I look forward to unpacking that in the time to come. If those listening have topics that they would like this interest area to address, at the moment there's a plan for 4 meetings a year, approximately quarterly. My thought is to rotate between being consumer-led and sector-led. So the next one will be a consumer-led meeting, and we'll be discussing a topic of interest in that area that's of interest equally to the consumer, because this is about us learning about each other, this group. So if you have topic suggestions, please send them through, either to the ARC's office or to me. My email is janelle@accesscr.com.au, but I can put that in an email. Don't know how ARCS wants to handle those kind of things. So thank you so much to everybody for joining us. I hope you've got some value out of this session. I certainly have. I've enjoyed speaking with you both, and enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you, Shani.
Yeah, thanks, Janelle. Thanks, Lee and Kathy. And too, please give us feedback if this is sort of information that's useful for you, so we can get better with the way we deliver. So thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for inviting us. Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good day.